10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. I'm Joe, the host, and apparently it's my first time on a microphone. I started talking before my mouth was close to it. Thanks for being here today, and I know you heard the disclaimer just a second ago, but I need to tell you again, if you've got a queasy tummy, this may not be the episode for you today. It's gross. So anything past this point, it's kind of on you. Before I gross you out, let me take a moment to invite you to subscribe to this podcast if you have not done that already. If you're brand new and have never listened before, first of all, welcome. Glad you're here. And I hope after today's episode, you like what you hear and you'll stick around and subscribe and become a regular listener. And if you're an OG 10-Minute Murder listener, I appreciate you more than words can say. And I hope that you're sharing this podcast with your friends and anyone else that, like us, are weird and we like to hear about weird things. And I've said it before, but do not share this podcast with your friends unless you're sure that they like true crime. I've made that mistake before, talking about serial killers with normal people. It doesn't go well. The story today is about Ricky Casso, who was also known as the Acid King. The murder happened in 1984, and it was during a time that we now call the Satanic Panic, when grown-ups were freaking out about the type of music people were listening to and the games they were playing. So if you were listening to Black Sabbath or Judas Priest or Ozzy Osbourne, AC/DC, just a huge list of those hard rock bands, or if you were playing Dungeons and Dragons. People thought you were going straight to hell. So keep that in mind as you hear the story today. This is Ricky Kasso Jr., the Acid King. In 1984, the 4th of July celebrations took a dark turn when a police dog found a shallow grave in the Aztakea Woods in Northport, New York. In that grave lay the badly mutilated body of 17-year-old Gary Lauwers, wearing a denim vest, running pants, and white undershorts. He also had on a pair of Nikes. He had been stabbed multiple times with numerous dents visible on the bones from the blade of a knife. And they were not just a few stabs, more like 30, maybe 50. And as if that was not enough, Gary's killer also cut his eye out. Luckily, investigators already had a suspect. Gary's body had been found thanks to an anonymous call to the police that gave information about the murder, the location of the body, and the alleged person behind it, Ricky Casso. Richard Allan Ricky Kasso Jr. was born March 29, 1967, in Huntington, New York. He was the son of a high school history teacher and football coach, and the big brother of 3 younger sisters. Ricky's father once described his son as, quote, model child and a young athlete. But as soon as drugs came into the picture, Ricky's life changed. He changed. Ricky's strict disciplinarian father did not have any tolerance for his son's new hobby. And so, Ricky ran away from home as a young teen, living on the streets of Long Island and sleeping in the woods, cars, garages, backyards, and houses of friends. Sometimes even in the sewer trench at the Port Jefferson Railroad Station. There was no stability in his life other than the continuous usage of marijuana, hashish, PCP, and LSD. Ricky actually enjoyed drugs so much that he even started to call himself the Acid King. Most of the time, Ricky kept it all for himself, but every now and then, he dealt drugs in the Northport area. However, drugs were not Ricky's only obsession. By the age of 17, he had found the world of black magic and Satanism after reading Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. His former classmates said that Ricky would go to cemeteries and hang out, smoke 10 bags of angel dust, and try to get in touch with the devil. Once, he even drove to the Amityville Horror House to celebrate a German pagan feast that I'm about to attempt to pronounce with complete certainty that I'm going to say it wrong. It's called Walpurgisnacht. Ricky made his dark interest very clear to everybody. One time, he walked into a roadhouse with a pocket knife and started carving something on the wooden beams. When he revealed what he had written, it said Satan, spelled S-A-T-I-N. Of course, it was clear what Ricky was trying to carve, but his poor spelling caused everybody to start laughing. People were teasing him about it and how he always talked so highly about Satan stuff, but he couldn't even spell it right. Ricky's life continued the downward spiral. At least once, he tried to get help for himself and was, on one occasion, involuntarily committed to the South Oaks Hospital because of his drug addiction. During his time in South Oaks, Ricky tried to escape 5 times and even tried to hang himself with a sweater in the shower. Finally, he changed his tactic and started to tell the doctors what he thought they wanted to hear. And it worked. Ricky was released in the last week of May 1983. But he didn't have any intention on doing better or quitting drugs. Like Ricky himself said, quote, "Look, I know I'm not going to live past 20, so I'm just going to have fun while I'm here." And he was right. Ricky didn't have many friends, at least not any real ones, but 17-year-old Jimmy Troiano, also called Dracula, was one of the few. He wasn't as dominant as Ricky, but almost every other feature matched. Jimmy was a failure at school and was arrested repeatedly for burglary. He aided Ricky with his drug dealing as much as using their own supply. Another so-called friend was 17-year-old Gary Lauwers, who was more like a peasant following his master everywhere. He was basically a good kid, a little silly with a high spirit, able to go either way in life. But unfortunately, Gary spent time with the wrong people, and he was an easy target. On April 21st, 1984, New Park kids were having a basement party. Ricky was there, and he brought Gary with him. Another thing that Ricky brought, several bags of angel dust, and on each packet was stamped with red ink, "Sudden Impact," a subtle hint to the user. At the party, Ricky amused himself by playing records of Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden backward while looking for satanic messages. Later, he got high, and then even more high before rolling a large joint. Ricky soon passed out, and then Gary saw his opportunity. He reached into his friend's pocket and snatched 10 bags of angel dust. Gary left the party thinking he'd never get caught. The following day was Easter Sunday. Gary woke up, got dressed, and stepped out of his apartment. He didn't get very far because Ricky was waiting there for him in the parking lot. When confronted, Gary made little effort to hide his guilt. Ricky took the 5 remaining bags of angel dust that he found in Gary's pockets and told Gary he had 2 weeks to pay him back. Meanwhile, Ricky engaged in other hobbies and activities, just different things he liked to do, like grave robbing, because why not? He was caught and arrested, and police officers found in his pocket a list of demons. And Ricky seemed to enjoy the process of explaining to officers about the rankings in hell. However, there was no actual evidence that Ricky had stolen something from a grave, and he was given a lesser charge of violating the public health law, and his court date was set for June 18th. He was free to go. By mid-1984, Ricky continued to spiral deeper into his dark obsession and drug use, and his patience with Gary was coming to its end. He'd eventually gotten some money from Gary's mother, but all that mattered was Gary still owed another $20. It was time to take action. It was June 19th, 1984, and the school year was ending. Gary was looking for forgiveness that evening. It was finally time to make things right with Ricky after 2 long months. Gary had been thinking about his life and decided that he was going to leave Long Island and possibly join the army. But before that, he wanted to see Ricky. Ricky was doing drugs that night, per usual. He'd invited Gary to join the party, and the two and some other friends got themselves as high as humanly possible. Then at some point, Ricky said, "Let's go up to Aztakea and trip." Gary hesitated. He had other plans, but eventually agreed after Ricky promised he wouldn't beat him up. But Gary didn't know Ricky had other plans. Something much worse. When the group entered the forest, there was no light, no sound, and only a few crows flying above. Then, according to Jimmy, aka Dracula, Ricky lit a campfire and demanded Gary remove his clothes and donate them to the fire. When Gary said no, Ricky attacked him. While the others watched, Ricky bit Gary's neck and stabbed him over and over. While continuing to stab him, Ricky shouted at Gary, trying to force him to say that he loved Satan. He refused. With his last breath, he cried out, "I love you, Mom," before he went silent. While Jimmy Dracula denied that he helped Ricky to kill Gary, he later admitted that he helped move Gary's body further into the woods. When they found a suitable place, Ricky bent over the body and began chanting something about Satan. Thinking he saw Gary's head moving, Ricky started repeatedly stabbing him in the face before leaving the forest. The whole time, Ricky was laughing. Of course, being the huge hunk of garbage that he is, Ricky couldn't shut up about what he had done. He told multiple classmates and other friends about Gary's gruesome death and even took several down to see the body. Not before long, a phone call was made. Sunday, July 1st, 1984, 4:45 p.m. A call stated, "There is a body in the woods behind Gunther's tap room." A few days later, Gary's body was found. The police the following day arrested both Ricky and Jimmy, who were found passed out in a car. People all over Long Island were shocked that teenagers had committed such a crime. The murder was a media sensation, being during the time of satanic panic, with links to the satanic cults being made left and right. Even the investigators went along with the cult theory. However, not a single other cult member was ever found, and many stories were eventually proven false. Finally, people had to accept the fact that a single individual can be evil and act on his own and commit such a brutal crime all by himself. Often, even if there's just a tiny bit of something pointing to satanic activity, everything else gets forgotten and the media gets absolutely crazy. But Ricky, Gary, and Jimmy were all troubled teenagers with heavy drug use involved. Drug addictions can be scarier than satanic cults. Unfortunately, the only person who could have told us about the true motives behind the murder is not here anymore. 2 days after his arrest, Ricky Casso hanged himself with a bedsheet in his jail cell on July 7th, 1984, taking all of the answers with him. Jimmy Troiano, aka Dracula, was later charged as an accomplice in the crime, but was ultimately acquitted in April 1985. His lawyer argued that the teen was so high at the end of the night and during the murder, didn't even know what was real and what was not. A convenient excuse. And that's today's 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. Thanks for listening today. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, and you would like to do me a quick favor as my dog tries to destroy everything that's underneath my feet, stop it. If you could do me a huge favor, I would really appreciate it. It helps out the podcast a lot when I receive 5-star ratings and reviews. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, that's the only place that I know of that you can do it. That's super strange to me, by the way, that's the only place you can really leave reviews. But a 5-star rating and review helps out a lot, and it makes this podcast show up to more people that could be interested in brief true crime stories like this one. Connect with 10-Minute Murder on Facebook and Instagram. There you'll see all of the visuals that go along with the stories that you hear about here. I don't post crime scene photos that are gross or anything like that. I don't want to see that myself, and I just assume that you don't. And if you do, you can Google it and find it yourself. But that's not the kind of stuff that I'm going to post. You can find links to that in the show notes of this episode, or just as easily go to Facebook or Instagram and in the search bar type 10-Minute Murder and it'll pop right up. Thank you for listening. Have a good night. Would you stop sniffing everything and get out?